In the distant mists of an age long buried, there was once a village swallowed by fog and fear. They called it Eldhollow. No birds sang there. No children laughed after dark. The trees whispered things they shouldn't, and the wind carried secrets too old to be forgotten. And when the barrows opened, not with sound, but with silence, something rose that no one could name. This is not the tale of a brave knight or a noble king. This is the story of Eadric, a boy too strange to be trusted and too gentle to be cruel. He could hear the thoughts of creatures no one believed were real, and he would walk willingly into the shadow, not to destroy a monster, but to understand one. Tonight we follow his footsteps, through haunted forests and crumbling ruins, through dreams that bite, foxes that feed on memory, and a sky that no longer holds the sun. This is a quiet story about sacrifice, about identity, and about what we become when we choose kindness in a world built on fear. So if you're lying awake tonight, or just need a voice to guide you through the darker parts of an old world, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, let the story carry you. And while you're here, I invite you to like this video, leave a comment, let me know where in the world you're listening from, and share this tale with someone who might need a quiet moment. If these kinds of stories help you rest, consider subscribing to keep the flame of forgotten lore burning. Now, let's return to Eldhollow, where the Hollow King waits beneath the earth. Chapter 1. The Eve of Wyrm Night. The mists of Eldhollow clung to the earth like the breath of the dead, swirling through the crooked lanes and pressing against the thatched roofs with spectral fingers. Even in the dying light of autumn's end, the fog never lifted from this cursed place, a village perched on the edge of memory, where the old gods still whispered from their stone tombs and the very air tasted of forgotten sins. Eadric pulled his threadbare cloak tighter as he made his way through the village square, the cobblestones slick beneath his worn boots. At 16, he had learned to move like a shadow, to keep his head down and his thoughts carefully guarded. The other villagers gave him wide berth, their eyes following him with the wariness reserved for diseased animals or unblessed ground. He was the cursed boy, the devil's child, the one who spoke to beasts that should not be spoken to. Cursed. The word followed him everywhere, whispered behind cupped hands and hissed through rotted teeth. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that he didn't choose to hear the voices. They came to him unbidden, a constant susurrus of inhuman thoughts that pressed against his skull like eager moths against candle flame. Tonight was Wyrm Night, the ancient festival when Eldhollow's people burned their effigies and chanted the old protections. The smell of pitch and dried herbs hung heavy in the air, mingling with the ever-present decay that seemed to seep from the very stones. In the square's center, a towering pyre had been built, a grotesque sculpture of bundled straw and cloth, twisted into the likeness of some primordial horror. Around its base, the villagers had placed offerings: blackened bread, cups of sour wine, and iron trinkets meant to turn away evil. Eadric paused at the square's edge, watching as Elder Wulfric raised his gnarled hands to address the gathered crowd. The old man's voice cracked like breaking ice as he began the ritual words, the same incantations their forefathers had spoken when this land was young and the boundary between worlds was thin as morning frost. On this night, Wulfric intoned, we remember the compact made in blood and shadow. We kindle the sacred fires to hold back the dark, to keep the old hungers sleeping in their stone beds. The crowd murmured in response, their voices a low drone that seemed to harmonize with something deep beneath the earth. Eadric felt it too, a vibration in his bones, a stirring in the hollow places where normal folk kept their fears. But for him it was different. Where others heard only the echo of ancestral dread, he heard them, the creatures that dwelt in the spaces between seeing and knowing. The fire speaker speaks old words, Asterisk came a voice like autumn leaves scraping stone. Asterisk, but the words have lost their weight. The compact phrase. Asterisk. Eadric's breath caught. The voice belonged to something vast and scaled, something that had watched these rituals for centuries uncounted. He tried to block it out, to build walls in his mind as he'd been taught by the village wise woman before she died screaming 3 winters past. But the voice pressed closer. Young blood singer, why do you close your ears? Tonight the deep sleepers wake. Tonight the barrows crack. A chill ran down Eadric's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. The barrows, those ancient mounds that dotted the landscape beyond Eldhollow like the scales of some buried leviathan. Local lore claimed they were the tombs of forgotten kings, but older whispers spoke of things that had never been human at all. Elder Wulfric's torch touched the base of the pyre, and flames leaped skyward with unnatural eagerness. The crowd cheered, but their voices sounded thin in the thickening mist. As the fire climbed higher, casting writhing shadows on the surrounding buildings, Eadric noticed something wrong. The flames burned too bright, too hungry, and in their depths he glimpsed shapes that should not exist, coiling forms with too many eyes, reaching appendages that grasped at nothing. Then the screaming began. It started as a low moan from somewhere beyond the village, a sound like wind through broken stone, but carrying a malevolent intelligence that made the hair on Eadric's arms stand rigid. The villagers fell silent, their celebration dying on their lips as that awful voice rose and fell in cadences that hurt to hear. The ground beneath the square began to tremble. "The barrows," someone whispered, and the words spread through the crowd like plague. "Something stirs in the barrows." Eadric turned toward the hills beyond Eldhollow, where the ancient burial mounds stood sentinel against the starless sky. One of them, the largest, the one the villagers called King's Crown, was glowing with a sickly phosphorescence that seemed to pulse in time with the distant wailing. Cracks appeared in its surface, spreading like a spider's web across the earthen dome. The screaming grew louder, and with it came a new sound, the grinding of stone against stone, the crack of splitting earth. Something vast was stirring beneath King's Crown, something that had slept for so long that moss and bracken had grown thick over its resting place. Then the barrow exploded. Stone and earth fountained skyward as something immense burst from the ancient tomb. In the hellish glow of the festival fire, Eadric saw it clearly, a creature of bone and shadow that dwarfed the village church, its form a blasphemous fusion of human and beast. Antlers like twisted iron sprouted from a skull large as a cottage, while tattered wings of decaying flesh spread wide enough to blot out the stars. This was the Hollow King, the thing that lived in the oldest nightmares, the shadow that had given Eldhollow its name. The creature's roar shattered windows and sent the villagers fleeing in terror. But worse than its size or its terrible appearance was the wrongness that radiated from it, a corruption that seemed to seep into everything it touched. Where its claws scraped the earth, the grass withered and died. Where its breath touched the air, reality itself seemed to curdle and spoil. In the chaos, Eadric heard a child scream, high and desperate, cutting through the general panic like a blade. He turned to see little Eldhollow, the baker's daughter, trapped beneath a fallen timber as one of the burning effigies collapsed. Flames licked at the dry wood, and in moments she would be consumed. The villagers ran past her without stopping, too terrified by the Hollow King's emergence to think of anything but escape. But Eadric couldn't move. The child's terror struck him like a physical blow, and beneath it he felt something else. A presence vast and ancient, stirring in the deep woods beyond the barrows. "The Flame Daughter will die," Asterisk came the voice again, clearer now. Asterisk, unless you sing to me as your blood demands. Unless you speak the words that bridge beast and man. Asterisk. Eadric knew what it was asking, knew what it would cost him. For years he had hidden his gift, pretending to be merely strange rather than cursed. But if he used his power now, if he reached out with his mind and spoke to the creature in the woods, Eldhollow screamed again, and the choice was made. Closing his eyes, Eadric let his mental barriers fall. His consciousness reached out like a questing hand, seeking the presence he could feel coiled in the darkness beyond sight. When he found it, the contact burned through him like liquid fire. Lindworm, he called, using a name older than Eldhollow itself. Asterisk, ancient flamebearer, I call to you. A child dies. Will you answer? Asterisk. The response came not in words but in images. Scales like molten gold, eyes like captured stars. A serpentine form large as a river but graceful as smoke. The lindworm had slept beneath the forest for 300 years, but Eadric's call awakened something that had never truly died. I hear you, Bloodsinger. Your words carry the old authority. I will come. Asterisk. The forest erupted in golden light as the lindworm burst from the earth, its serpentine body coiling through the air with impossible grace. It swept over Eldhollow like a river of flame, its presence driving back the Hollow King's corruption. With surgical precision, the great Wyrm plucked the burning timber from Eldhollow's body, its flames somehow consuming the fire without harming the child. The girl lived, but as Eadric opened his eyes, he saw the faces of the villagers who had witnessed his communion with the beast. Fear and revulsion twisted their features, and he knew that everything had changed. He was no longer just the cursed boy, he was something worse. Something that spoke to monsters and commanded them. Elder Wulfric pointed a shaking finger at him, his voice cracking with accusation. Demon spawn, you brought this curse upon us. The beasts heed your call because you are one of them. The crowd took up the cry, their terror finding focus in the familiar shape of their scapegoat. But Eadric barely heard them. His mind was still connected to the lindworm, still feeling the echo of its ancient memories. And in those memories, he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. The Hollow King was not alone. It was merely the first, a herald of something far older and more terrible stirring in the deep places of the world. The barriers were failing, the ancient compacts crumbling, and creatures that should remain legend were preparing to walk the earth once more. As the villagers advanced on him with their makeshift weapons, Eadric looked up at the Hollow King, which had turned its terrible gaze upon the village below. In those hollow sockets, he saw not just hunger but recognition, as if the creature knew him, had been waiting for him. The battle for Eldhollow was over before it had truly begun. But Eadric understood now that this was only the first movement in a symphony of darkness that would echo across the realm. His gift had saved one child, but it had also marked him as something the old powers would not ignore. The lindworm's golden eyes met his one final time before the great serpent faded back into legend. Asterisk, this is but the beginning, young singer. Greater songs await, and darker choices. The blood pact calls, and you must answer. Asterisk. Then it was gone, leaving Eadric alone with the mob's anger and the Hollow King's malevolent attention. As he turned to flee into the mist-shrouded night, he carried with him the terrible knowledge that his journey into the realm of monsters and ancient powers had only just begun. The Whispering Hollow. Act 2. The Pact of Beasts. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse foam-flecked and dying beneath him. blood seeped through bandages wrapped hastily around his arms, and his eyes held the hollow stare of one who had gazed too long into darkness. When he collapsed at the village gate, clutching a sealed scroll bearing the king's crimson seal, even the boldest among Eldhollow survivors dared not approach. Eadric watched from the shadows as the village elders broke the wax with trembling fingers. Their faces paled as they read, and whispered words carried on the morning wind. Plague, madness, the darkness spreading. 3 villages to the north had fallen silent. 2 more to the east reported their children born with eyes like black stones, speaking in tongues that predated human memory. The curse of the Hollow King was no longer contained to their small corner of the world. It was spreading like poison through the realm's veins, and the dying messenger brought desperate pleas from a king who finally understood that some evils could not be contained by crown or sword. That night, as Eadric sat beside his mother's grave, her headstone already beginning to crack and weep strange, dark sap, he heard it again. The calling, not the malevolent whisper of the Hollow King this time, but something older, weaker, tinged with desperate hope. Come to me, beast speaker, before the moon sets, before all is lost. The voice guided him deeper into the thornwood than he had ever dared venture, past the ring of standing stones that marked the boundary between the world of men and the realm of older things. Here, the trees grew so thick that moonlight became mere memory, and the air itself seemed to breathe with ancient secrets. He found the druid in a grove where 9 oaks had grown together, their branches intertwined like the fingers of praying hands. The old man lay dying among their roots, his body more bark than flesh, moss carpeting his shoulders like a funeral shroud. His eyes, when they opened, held the deep green of forest depths. Eadric Grimhold, the druid whispered, each word costing him visible effort. Son of 2 worlds, I have waited so long for you to come. I don't understand. Eadric knelt beside the dying man, feeling the pull of something vast and patient in the darkness around them. The voices, the creatures that speak to me. My mother said it was madness. A sound escaped the druid that might have been laughter, if laughter could hold such deep sorrow. Madness? Child, you are the first beast speaker born in 3 centuries. You carry in your blood the memory of the first covenant, when human and creature stood as allies beneath the same stars. The old man's hand, gnarled as a tree root, grasped Eadric's wrist with surprising strength. Suddenly, visions flooded the young man's mind, ancient images that felt more real than memory. He saw a time when the world was younger, when great beasts roamed freely alongside humans who had not forgotten their place in the web of life. Dragons counsel kings from crystal thrones. Wolves ran as messengers between villages. The fox spirits taught children the language of dreams, while the earthbound trolls shared the secrets of growing things. At the heart of it all stood the guardians, beings of immense power who maintained the balance between all living things. Chief among them was Valdris, the crown of thorns, whose domain stretched across forest and field, mountain and stream. It was paradise, the druid continued, his voice growing fainter, until men grew greedy for dominion, until they forgot that power shared is power multiplied, and sought instead to chain what should roam free. The visions shifted, showing darkness and betrayal. A human king, proud, golden-haired, with eyes like winter storms, standing before Valdris with chains of cold iron, demanding submission. The Guardian's refusal, the war that followed, brother against brother, beast against man, the very earth weeping blood. Your father, the druid whispered, and Eadric's world tilted on its axis. King Eldric the Conqueror, he who broke the first covenant and doomed both our peoples to this age of shadow. My father died when I was a babe, Eadric said, but even as the words left his lips, he felt their falseness. Your mother fled his court when she learned what he planned. She loved a good man in this village, took his name, raised you as his son. But blood will tell, child. The power that calls to you is your birthright and your burden. The ancient trees seemed to lean closer, listening. In their shadows, Eadric glimpsed movement. Eyes that reflected starlight, shapes that might have been bear or wolf or something altogether stranger. Valdris became the Hollow King, the druid continued. Love turned to hatred, protection to vengeance. He sleeps beneath the barrows, dreaming of the day when he will make mankind pay for their betrayal. But his dreams have grown dark, poisoned by centuries of rage. He no longer seeks justice, only destruction. Then why do you tell me this? Eadric asked. If I am the son of the betrayer, why would the beasts trust me? Because the druid's eyes closed, his breathing growing shallow. You are also the child of prophecy, born of both bloodlines, belonging fully to neither. You alone can speak to both human and beast, can bridge what was broken. You can restore the covenant, or see both worlds burn in the fires of ancient wrath. As the old man's final breath escaped him, his body began to crumble, returning to the earth with unseemly speed. Where he had lain, a single flower bloomed, pale as moonlight, with petals that seemed to hold their own illumination. Eadric reached for it with trembling fingers, and the moment he touched the stem, the forest around him erupted into whispered conversation. They emerged from shadow and half-light, drawn by some signal he could not perceive. First came the fox, her coat the color of autumn leaves, her eyes holding depths that spoke of dreams within dreams. She was smaller than he had expected, barely reaching his knee, but there was something in her presence that commanded attention. I am Mara, she said, her voice like wind through dried grass. I eat the nightmares that would devour sleeping minds, and I have tasted the dreams of your village. They are bitter with fear, but underneath there is still hope. That is why I will follow you. Next came the troll, rising from what Eadric had taken for a moss-covered boulder. Thornback stood nearly 8 feet tall, his hide bark rough and decorated with living vines. Mushrooms grew in the creases of his elbows, and flowers bloomed in his footprints. When he spoke, his voice was the rumble of distant thunder. The earth weeps, he said simply. The green things wither where the Hollow King's influence spreads. I have felt trees scream in their dreams. This cannot continue. His massive hand fell on Eadric's shoulder with surprising gentleness. The old druid spoke true. You carry the scent of both realms. I will lend you my strength. Last came Werda, and she brought with her the chill of the grave. Once human, now something between life and death, she drifted rather than walked, her pale skin translucent in the moonlight. Tattered wings, more bone than flesh, rustled at her shoulders. Her eyes were pools of silver light. I smell no lies on you, she said, her voice like winter wind through empty houses. That is unusual. Most humans reek of deception before they even open their mouths. But you, she circled him slowly, appraising. You speak truth even when it hurts. I will follow, beast speaker, because lies poison the world as surely as any curse. And so began the strangest fellowship in the history of either realm. A village bastard who was secretly a prince, a nightmare-eating fox, an earthbound troll, and a truth-seeking wight, bound together by prophecy and desperate hope. They traveled deeper into the thornwood, following paths that existed only in the memory of trees. The forest here was older than human civilization, and it watched them pass with eyes that predated the divisions between species. Ancient ruins dotted their journey, circles of standing stones where druids once held council with forest spirits, crumbling towers where the first beast speakers learned their craft. On their first night together, they made camp in the shelter of a ruined temple dedicated to forgotten gods. As Thornback coaxed fire from dry wood with a touch of his earth magic, and Mara hunted for the small game that would feed them, Werda perched on a broken column and spoke of the time before her transformation. "I was a merchant's daughter," she said, her silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "I dealt in pretty lies, told customers what they wanted to hear, promised miracle cures that were nothing but colored water and hope. The transformation came slowly. First I could taste deception on my tongue, bitter as wormwood. Then I could smell it, see it hanging around liars like a foul mist. Finally, I could no longer stomach food or water. Only truth could nourish me." "Do you regret it?" Eadric asked, genuinely curious. "Regret?" Werda considered the question, her head tilted at an angle no living human could achieve. "I mourn my mortality, yes, but I have never been hungrier for truth than I am now. And in a world built on lies, that hunger serves a purpose." Mara returned with a brace of rabbits, their deaths clean and swift. As they cooked, she spoke of dreams and the art of eating nightmares. "People think I steal their fears," she explained, her clever paws cleaning her whiskers. "But that's not how it works. I don't take nightmares away. I transform them. Fear into wisdom, terror into strength. The dream remains, but its power changes." Thornback nodded approvingly. "All things change form, but nothing truly dies. The earth teaches this lesson every season." As the night deepened and their fire burned low, Eadric found himself speaking of his childhood. The voices that called to him from the forest, the way animals seemed to understand his thoughts, the crushing loneliness of being different in a world that feared difference. "You were never alone," Mara said softly. "We were always listening, waiting for you to grow strong enough to hear us clearly. The old covenant may be broken, but some bonds transcend even betrayal." They traveled for 3 days through increasingly strange terrain. The trees here grew in impossible spirals, their bark inscribed with runes that hurt to look upon. Pools of water reflected not the sky above but glimpses of other times, other places. Ghost lights danced between the branches, leading them ever deeper into the heart of mystery. On the third night, as they sheltered in a grove where the trees hummed with barely contained power, Werda suddenly tensed. "Someone approaches," she hissed, "and they carry such lies upon them that I can taste the poison from here." From the darkness stepped a figure that made Eadric's blood run cold. A man in rich robes, his face hidden beneath a hood, but his bearing unmistakably regal. When he drew back the cowl, Eadric found himself staring at features that mirrored his own. The same storm-gray eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same golden hair touched with premature silver. "My son," said King Eldric the Conqueror, though he had been dead for 20 years. "At last we meet." Werda recoiled, her wings spreading wide in distress. "Lies!" she shrieked. "This thing is woven from lies so thick I cannot see through them to truth." But Thornback stepped forward, his massive frame interposing itself between Eadric and the apparition. "Not lies," he rumbled. Memory, guilt given form. The Hollow King's power grows stronger as we near his domain. The false king smiled, and in that expression Eadric saw everything the druid had shown him. The pride that had doomed 2 races, the arrogance that had shattered paradise. You think to restore what I broke, boy? You think to undo the choices that made you possible? Without my betrayal, without my conquest, you would never have been born. The Beast Speaker bloodline would have died with the old druids. Begone, Eadric said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. I am not my father. I will not be defined by his sins. The apparition laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You carry my blood, my ambition, my destiny. In the end, you will choose as I chose, power over principle, dominion over harmony. It is what we are. But even as the words hung in the air, the false king began to fade. Mara had crept close during the confrontation, and now she stood beside Eadric, her small form radiating defiance. I have eaten this nightmare 1,000 times, she said. The fear that we are doomed to repeat our parents' mistakes, that blood determines destiny. It has no power here. The apparition dissolved like smoke, leaving behind only the scent of old corruption and older regrets. Is it true? Eadric asked his companions as they settled back around their dying fire. Am I truly the son of the king who destroyed the covenant? Werda, who had been silent since her distress at the false king's lies, finally spoke. The blood truth is complex. You are his son, yes, but you are also the son of a woman who chose love over power, exile over privilege. You are the son of the man who raised you, who taught you kindness and humility. Blood is only one thread in the tapestry of who you are. Thornback nodded. The earth remembers all who walk upon it. Your father's footsteps left scars that have not healed. But yours are different. Where you walk, small flowers grow in the cracks. They were 5 days into the deep forest when they first glimpsed their destination through the trees, the ruined royal city of Drakmor, where Eldric the Conqueror had once held court. The sight of it stole the breath from Eadric's lungs. Once it must have been magnificent. Towers of white stone had spiraled toward the sky. Bridges of crystal had spanned impossible chasms. Gardens of perpetual spring had bloomed in courtyards paved with starlight. Now it was a monument to decay, its towers broken stumps against the gray sky. Its bridges collapsed into the chasm that surrounded it like a moat of despair. And over it all hung the shadow of the Hollow King. Not a physical darkness, but something deeper. A weight of grief and rage that pressed down upon the earth like a suffocating blanket. Even the air itself seemed reluctant to enter the boundaries of the dead city. There, Mara whispered, her ears flat against her skull. That's where it all began. Where the first betrayal took place, where trust died and hatred was born. And where it must end, Eadric said, though his voice shook with the magnitude of what lay ahead. One way or another, Werda spread her tattered wings, preparing for flight. The Hollow King knows we're coming. I can taste his anticipation on the wind, bitter as old iron, hungry as winter. He's been waiting for this moment, for you, since the day you were born. Thornback placed one massive hand on the ground, feeling the pulse of life beneath stone and soil. The earth here is sick, he reported, but not dead, not yet. There is still hope for healing, if the right choices are made. As they began their descent toward the ruined city, Eadric felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a mantle too heavy to bear. Behind him lay the world of his childhood, simple and small and safe. Ahead waited the Hollow King, ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond imagining, and carrying a grudge that had poisoned 3 centuries. But between past and future, between betrayal and redemption, walked a young man who spoke the language of beasts and carried the blood of 2 worlds in his veins. What he would choose in the trials ahead, whether he would prove himself his father's son or something entirely new, remained to be seen. The fellowship descended through the dying light toward the broken crown of Drakmor, and behind them, the thornwood whispered its ancient prayers to gods who no longer answered. Ahead lay darkness, but in that darkness, perhaps, the seeds of a new dawn. The Hollow King was waiting. Act 3, the broken crown. The royal city spread before them like a wound carved into the earth's flesh. Once proud spires jutted from the cursed landscape like the ribs of some vast, slaughtered beast, their stones blackened by an unholy blight that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent heartbeat. The blood-red moon hung bloated overhead, casting everything in the hue of old carnage, while shadows writhed between the buildings like living things hungry for warmth. Eadric's breath misted in the unnatural cold as he led his companions through streets that had once echoed with merchants' calls and children's laughter. Now only whispers filled the air, fragments of voices that might have been wind, or might have been the last words of the damned. Ash fell like snow, settling on his shoulders and catching in his beard, each flake carrying the weight of dreams burned to nothing. "Look how they stand," Mara whispered, her antlered crown catching the crimson moonlight, like sentinels in death. The stone husks lined every thoroughfare. Men, women, children frozen mid-step, mid-scream, mid-prayer. Their faces bore expressions of such pure terror that Eadric had to turn away. A baker still held his loaves, now turned to granite. A mother clutched her babe, both transformed into monuments to horror. The curse had taken them all in an instant, preserving their final moment of mortal fear for eternity. "The churches," Thornback rumbled, his massive frame casting long shadows across the cobblestones. "Even the holy places have fallen." The great cathedral that had once dominated the city's heart now stood gutted and broken. Its magnificent rose window had shattered outward like a dying star, and black vines, thick as a man's torso, coiled around its remaining spires. The bells that had called the faithful to prayer hung silent and cracked, and where once had stood the carved saints now gaped empty niches, as if the stone figures had fled in the night. Werda drifted ahead of them, her ethereal form seeming to drink in the darkness. "The veil grows thin here," she murmured. "Can you feel it, Eadric? The boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead grows gossamer fine." He could feel it, a tugging sensation in his chest, as if something unseen were drawing him forward with invisible chains. The very air seemed to shimmer with possibility and dread, and when he looked closely at the shadows, he could swear he saw faces forming and dissolving in their depths. They pressed deeper into the city's heart, past fountains that ran with water black as night and market squares where phantom winds stirred goods that crumbled to dust at their touch. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until Eadric could almost make out words in the ancient tongue. Curses and lamentations and pleas for mercy that would never come. At the city's center, where once the royal palace had stood in majesty, now yawned a great chasm that seemed to descend beyond the reach of even the blood moon's light. From its depths rose a stairway carved from bones, not the small bones of men, but the massive vertebrae and ribs of creatures that had walked the earth when the world was young. "The Hollow King's domain," Mara said, her voice barely audible above the wind that moaned up from the depths. "The realm beneath the barrows, where the old gods go to die. Eadric felt his courage waver as he gazed into that abyss. The darkness below was not mere absence of light. It was something alive and hungry, something that pulled at the very essence of his soul. But he thought of the stone husks in the streets, of the children who would never grow to adulthood, of the songs that would never again ring out from the broken churches. "We descend," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The bone stairway creaked under their weight as they spiraled down into the earth's bowels. With each step, reality seemed to grow more fluid, more uncertain. The walls flickered between rough stone and smooth flesh, and sometimes Eadric could swear he heard a great heartbeat echoing from somewhere far below. The descent felt both endless and instantaneous. Time moved like honey here, thick and golden and strange. One moment they were walking down carved steps. The next they found themselves standing in a vast chamber that defied all natural law. This was the Hollow Realm, the Twilight Kingdom where the Hollow King held court. The sky overhead was neither day nor night, but something in between. A perpetual dusk that spoke of endings without hope of new beginnings. Rivers of liquid shadow flowed through valleys that shifted and changed even as they watched. And in the distance stood ruins that seemed to breathe with a life all their own. "Behold," Werda whispered, "the graveyard of the old gods." Ancient temples dotted the landscape. Temples to deities whose names had been forgotten before the first stones of the royal city had been laid. Their altars ran with offerings of memory and dreams, and their broken columns were carved with symbols that hurt to look upon directly. These were the gods who had ruled when man was young and the world was wild, before the coming of the new faith had driven them into shadow. Skeletal trees stretched toward the twilight sky, their branches heavy with fruit that might have been human hearts or might have been dying stars. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched their own hearts, as if the entire realm were some vast, living thing dreaming dark dreams. As they walked deeper into this surreal landscape, Eadric began to see faces in the ruins, faces he recognized from his own ancestral memories. Here stood the ghost of a king who had ruled when dragons still flew. There the shade of a queen who had spoken with the voices of the wind. His bloodline stretched back through the centuries, and here in this place where time held no meaning, they all existed at once. "Do you understand now?" came a voice that seemed to emerge from the very stones themselves. "Do you see what you have inherited?" The Hollow King materialized before them like mist taking shape, though even now Eadric could not look directly upon his face. He was tall and terrible, crowned with thorns that wept black tears, and his robes seemed woven from the darkness between stars. "Your ancestors," the Hollow King continued, his voice like the wind through empty crypts. "They made a choice when they drove the old gods into exile. They chose the light of the new faith over the ancient wisdom of the earth. And in doing so, they doomed us all to this half-existence." Eadric felt the truth of it like a sword thrust to his heart. The war between man and beast, between the new faith and the old ways, it had never truly ended. It had only been buried, festering like an untreated wound in the kingdom's soul. "But you," the Hollow King said, and now Eadric could hear something almost like hope in that terrible voice. "You carry both bloodlines within you, the blood of kings and the blood of those who remembered the old ways. You alone can choose a different path." It was then that Eadric turned to look upon his companions. Mara with her crown of antlers, Thornback with his ancient strength, Werda with her otherworldly grace, and saw them truly for the first time. The glamour fell away like morning mist, revealing the truth that had been hidden from him all along. They were not merely magical creatures born of the wild places. They were human souls, transformed and bound by the same ancient magic that had created the Hollow King himself. "We were like you once," Mara said, her voice heavy with centuries of sorrow, caught between the old ways and the new. "When the war came, when the choice had to be made, we chose to stand with the beasts rather than see them driven into oblivion." Thornback's great head bowed. "The magic changed us, bound us to this existence between life and death. We have walked the earth for generations uncounted, neither fully alive nor properly dead. We have been your guides," Werda added, her form flickering like candlelight, "because we recognized in you what we once were, a soul torn between two worlds, seeking a path that honors both." The revelation hit Eadric like a physical blow. These beings who had become his strange family, his chosen companions in this dark quest, they had once been human, had once felt the same conflicts that now tore at his own heart. They had sacrificed their very humanity for the sake of balance, and now they existed in this twilight realm of neither nor. "If you defeat the Hollow King," Mara continued, her antlers seeming to shine with their own inner light, "the magic that binds us will break. We will finally be free to pass into whatever lies beyond." "But if you choose mercy," Thornback rumbled, "if you let him live, then the curse will spread. The world above will fall into shadow, and all will become as this realm, trapped between life and death, belonging fully to neither." Eadric felt the weight of the choice pressing down upon him like a mountain. To save the world, he must sacrifice the only family he had ever truly known. To preserve these souls who had stood by him, taught him, loved him in their strange way, he must allow darkness to consume everything he had sworn to protect. "There is no path without loss," Werda whispered, and her voice carried the wisdom of ages. "There is no choice without sacrifice. This is the burden of those who would be kings, to choose which loves to preserve and which to surrender." The Hollow King watched this exchange with eyes that held the depth of eternity. "Choose wisely, son of two bloodlines, for this choice will echo through all the ages to come." Eadric closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his ancestors' choices, the pull of his companion's sacrifice, the desperate hope of the stone husks above. When he opened them again, his resolve was steel forged in the fires of grief. "I choose," he said, and his voice carried across the twilight realm like the tolling of a funeral bell. He stepped forward, toward the final confrontation that would crown him in thorns and dress him in sorrow, ready to perform the ultimate sacrifice that would bind the Hollow King and set his beloved companions free at last. Act 4, Crown of Thorns. The final chapter of the Whispering Hollow. The wind through the Hollow's heart carried the scent of dying leaves and ancient bone. Eadric stood at the threshold between worlds, where Shadow Realm met Earth, where the Hollow King's dominion pressed against the fragile veil of the living world. Behind him, the last remnants of his companions, those blessed and cursed souls who had answered his call, waited in the gathering dusk. Mara's spectral form flickered like candlelight, her warrior's stance diminished by the weight of what was to come. Thornback's massive frame cast shadows that seemed to reach for the earth itself, while Werda's ancient eyes held the sorrow of one who had seen too many endings. They knew, as he knew, that this would be their last stand together. "The binding must be willing," Werda whispered, her voice like autumn wind through barren branches. "Blood of the speaker, soul of the guardian. The old magic demands such prices." Before them, the Hollow King rose from his throne of twisted bone and shadow, his form vast and terrible in the dying light. Where once had been a man, A king who had loved his realm too fiercely, now stood something that devoured hope itself. His crown of blackened iron caught what little light remained, and his voice was the sound of kingdoms falling to dust. "You would cage us both, young speaker?" The Hollow King's laughter was the cracking of winter ice. "You understand so little of what you are, what we are. The blood that flows in your veins sings the same songs as mine." Eadric felt the truth of it like a blade between his ribs. The royal blood, the beast speaker gift, the way the shadows welcomed him as kin. All of it bound him to this creature in ways that made his sacrifice both possible and inevitable. He was not merely the lock. He was also the key that would turn upon itself. "I understand enough," Eadric replied, drawing his father's blade for the last time. The steel sang as it caught the light, runes along its edge glowing with inner fire. "I understand that some chains must be forged by choice." He pressed the blade's edge to his palm, letting his blood fall upon the ancient stones. Where it touched, thorns began to grow. Not the brambles of the cursed realm, but something older, something that spoke of sacrifice and binding. The thorns were silver white, beautiful and terrible, and they grew with each drop that fell. The ritual had begun. "By blood of kings and speakers both," Eadric intoned, the words rising from some deep well of inherited memory. "By choice freely given and chains willingly worn, I call upon the eldest powers. Let this realm be sealed, let its master be bound, and let the living world know peace." The Hollow King's rage shook the very foundations of his dominion. Shadow servants fled before the growing light of the thorns, and the twisted architecture of his realm began to crumble. But even as his power waned, the ancient king fought with the fury of one who had nothing left to lose. "If we are bound together, boy, then you shall know what I have known." The Hollow King lunged forward, his form dissolving into pure shadow and malice. "You shall feel the weight of centuries, the hunger that never ends, the loneliness that devours." The collision was not of flesh and shadow, but of will against will, soul against soul. Eadric felt the Hollow King's essence pouring into him, all the rage and sorrow and terrible longing that had driven a once noble king to become a devourer of hope. For a moment that stretched like eternity, he nearly broke beneath the weight of it. But then Mara's hand was on his shoulder, cold and comforting. "Remember who you choose to be," she whispered. Thornback's rumbling voice joined hers. "Remember those who stood with you, and Werda, ancient and wise. Remember that even shadows serve the light. In the end, their strength flowed into him, their belief became his anchor, and with it came the power to complete the binding." The thorns spread outward from where his blood had fallen, weaving themselves through the collapsing realm, creating a prison of choice and sacrifice. Each thorn that pierced the Hollow King's essence also pierced Eadric's soul, binding them together in chains that could never be broken. The realm shuddered and began its final collapse. Stone and shadow alike crumbled into void, drawn inexorably downward into the earth itself. The Hollow King's screams became whispers, became silence, as he was pulled into the prison that would hold him until the world's ending. But even as victory dawned, the price made itself known. "Our time grows short," Mara said, her form already beginning to fade. The binding had disrupted the very forces that held them in this realm, and the dead could not long remain among the living without a purpose to anchor them. "We go gladly," Thornback rumbled, his massive form becoming translucent. "To have served such a purpose. It is enough." Werda was the last to speak, her ancient face serene despite the sorrow in her eyes. You have given us rest, young speaker. We have been too long from the halls of the honored dead. She reached out with a fading hand to touch his cheek. But you must remain. The living world needs its guardians, even if they cannot know your name. I don't want to be alone, Eadric whispered, the words torn from him like a cry of pain. You will not be truly alone, Mara assured him as her form became mist and starlight. We will remember you in the lands beyond, and the beasts you have befriended. They will carry your story in their hearts. Until the ending of all things, Thornback added, his voice growing distant as wind. Until light conquers the final darkness, Werda concluded, and then she too was gone. Eadric stood alone in the ruins of the Hollow King's realm as it finished its collapse. The thorns that bound his enemy also bound him, creating a prison barrow deep beneath the earth where he would stand guard for all the ages to come. The weight of his crown, for that was what the thorns had become, a crown of his own choosing, pressed down upon his brow, but he bore it without complaint. Above him, he could feel the world beginning to heal. The whispers that had plagued the living would fade to memory. The shadows that had crept too close to hearth and home would retreat to their proper places. Children would sleep safely in their beds, and the sun would rise on a world unmarked by the Hollow King's hunger. It was enough. It had to be enough. 300 years hence, ***. The old woman by the fire lowered her voice as she came to the end of her tale, her listeners leaning forward in the flickering light. Outside the tavern, autumn wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out in the night. They say, she whispered, that beneath the great oak on Thornwood Hill, there lies a grave that no living hand has dug. Animals gather there when the moon is dark, and if you listen closely, you can hear them whisper a name that the wind carries away before mortal ears can catch it. A child at her knee, eyes wide with wonder and fear, tugged at her sleeve. What name, grandmother? What do they whisper? The old woman smiled, her eyes holding depths that spoke of older knowledge, older truths. The name of one who gave all he was to keep the darkness at bay. The name of the last beast speaker, who wore a crown of thorns and rode with legends to bind the shadows. The fire crackled, and for a moment, they all thought they heard it. A whisper on the wind, a name that felt familiar despite being unheard. But then the moment passed, as such moments always do, and the spell of the story released them back to their ordinary lives. The old woman gathered her shawl and prepared to leave, but as she reached the door, she paused. In the distance, barely audible above the wind, came another sound, a different whisper, older and hungrier, testing the strength of bonds laid down centuries before. The wheel turns, the voice seemed to say, * new speakers arise. New songs begin. * In a cottage at the village's edge, a young boy stirred in his sleep, his dreams filled with the voices of beasts he had never seen, calling out to him across the vast darkness. His mother, watching over him, noticed how the shadows seemed to lean closer to his bed, and she whispered a prayer to gods whose names she barely remembered. The story, it seemed, was not quite finished after all. End of Act 4, Crown of Thorns.